Hey everyone, it's your Peacekeeper, and I've got a video that's going to spark some controversy, and I have a feeling it's going to also bring up a really rather healthy discussion in the comment section. But underneath all this, you're going to see an epic battle replay involving Akizuki, one of my favorite destroyers in the game, by far my favorite tier 7 thus far, and this is my first solo warrior, first and only solo warrior, might I add, and this just happened a couple days ago. So while that's going on, I'm going to talk about what's going to spark so much controversy. And in this video, we're going to look at the assertion that Japanese torpedoes are, well, they're too easy to spot, and that makes them terrible torpedoes. We've covered this before in the past, and I know a lot of you guys have watched through my How to Play series on the Japanese destroyer line, and you kind of have an idea of where I'm coming at from this. I think the vast majority of Japanese destroyer captains underplay their ships. I think part of that is not using their guns, but I also think part of that is just not really knowing how or when to use their torpedoes. And, well, their argument always comes up that, well, I'm going to go to Warships.today, and I'm going to pull up the stats for these ships, and I'm going to show you how bad these torpedo hits are. See, Shimakaze only hits with 5% of her torpedoes, Gearing hits with 7%. We need to buff Shimakaze's torpedo options. The torpedo hit rate number on Warships.today that comes from the WarGaming API, which is the interface that gets all of these stats off of, is very misleading. And that's not going to come to a surprise to anyone who actually knows what that number represents. And for those who don't know, the torpedo hit ratio is the percentage of torpedoes hit of torpedoes launched. That seems a little obvious, but the key to that is it's the percentage of torpedoes that hit compared to the torpedoes that are launched. And the number itself, it doesn't tell the whole story, because 5% of Shimakaze's torpedoes hitting out of a salvo of 15 is literally 3/4 of every salvo. Sorry, not 3/4, but approximately 3/4 of a torpedo will hit every time you launch a torpedo. So it takes you roughly 20 torpedoes to get a successful to get a successful hit. And a lot of people will say, okay, so what about gearing? Well, if you do the math with gearing 7%, and so long, by the way, so long as this number maintains this like 2% number or so difference between the two, this ratio is always going to hold true. Whoa, just detonated Shinonome there. Anyway, this number is pretty much always going to hold true. It's going to take about 15, it's actually 14 torpedoes, so 3 salvos from a gearing to hit with a torpedo. So a lot of you are going, see, I told you, gearing only has to launch 14 torpedoes, and Shimakaze has to launch 20 just to get 1 torpedo hit. Well, the key difference between these two ships is the damage number, and a lot of people want to just throw out and ignore this damage number, and I think it's a huge mistake to do that, because Shimakaze's torpedoes do significantly more damage, almost a full 6,000 damage more than Gearing's torpedoes. And if you total this up and you take this, even if you look at this from, I just did it as a per match basis. So basically what I'm saying here is that in one match, of 20-minute match, this is the maximum number of torpedoes that a Shimakaze could hit with, or a Gearing could hit with. And the total numbers come out to be basically 6 torpedoes. And at 6 torpedoes, it's interesting because both Shimakaze and Gearing will hit with 6 torpedoes. In fact, we can go and we can look at the other ships, and this is what I've done actually, and we can see that other destroyers at this tier are hitting with more. Z-52, almost 8. Well, 7.5 basically. Grozovoy, 5.5. Khabarovsk, well, Khabarovsk is just Khabarovsk. It only has 6k torps, so they never get used. So the issue isn't the number of torpedoes that hit per se. In my opinion, it's the amount of damage that you're doing, because if Shimakaze and Gearing are hitting with the exact same number of torpedoes, which for all intents and purposes they are at 6, that tells me quite point blank right there everything that I need to know, because Shimakaze's torpedoes, if you're running the Type 93 Mod 3s, which I think the vast majority of people are, that's that 12-kilometer torpedo for those who don't know, you're going to be doing 6,000 damage more per hit. You take this out over a 20-minute match, and you're comparing about 140,000 damage maximum with those 6 torpedo hits to just 110,000. So almost 30,000, well, it is 30,000 basically, damage difference between the two. Just in torpedoes. Okay, well, fine. If it's not Shimakaze, then what about Yuugumo and Fletcher and Z46, Udaloy, and Tashkent? Well, we can go and do this at Udaloy or in Tier 9. And at Tier 9, Yuugumo is hitting with about 5 torpedoes a match, or basically 1 torpedo every 10 torpedoes, or sorry, every 16 torpedoes launched. So every 2 salvos, it's getting a torpedo hit. Fletcher, yep, it's a little bit better than that. It's about 0.6 torpedoes per salvo, so it takes us a little bit less than 20, somewhere around 18, if I'm doing my math correctly, okay? So that number is not fantastic, but the difference here, again, comes down, and by the way, this is probably the most close tier of all of these that I compared. I went all the way down to Tier 7, and the damage difference, again, it depends on what torpedo you're running, but if you're running the Type 93 Mod 3, which I suspect the vast majority of players are, there's a couple people still running the Type 93 Mod 2s and the F8s, and that's the same thing with Shimakaze as well. Overwhelmingly, I think the vast majority of players are actually going to be running the Type 93 Mod 3, but if it doesn't matter which one you choose. Fletcher's doing about 100,763 some odd damage with torpedoes, again, averaging about 5.3 torpedo hits in a match. Yuugumo with the Type 93 Mod 3, about 5. So basically the same, but again, huge difference in damage, about 4k per torpedo, and it comes out to being 120,000 damage with the Type 93 Mod 3. So you got more damage there. Now, a lot of people are going to say, yeah, but you don't have any guns. Well, yeah, the reason why you don't have any guns is because you are physically replacing your gun's damage output with torpedoes. And a lot of people are ignoring their guns entirely. And this is why I say you got to use your guns, guys. You have to use those guns, and you need to choose the right situations to do it. And I hope my how to play videos have helped with that. So really, what is the closest destroyer then to Yuugumo? Well, the answer to that is Z46. In fact, if you are still running the Type 93 Mod 2s, the Z46 is actually outpacing you in damage. Not only does it have a higher torpedo hit rate, it's hitting with 7.5 torpedoes a match for basically the same damage as the Type 93 Mod 2, which is hitting for just over 5. Now, Udaloy and Tashkent, yeah, they're not hitting with a whole lot. In fact, Udaloy hitting with about 5.5, but only doing about 81,000 damage. And the problem with this comparison is it assumes that the Udaloy managed to turn around to launch the 15 torpedoes that it has, because it's got 3 quintuple launchers that are all mounted. You got 1 in a center line and then 2 wing ones, and that's assuming you were able to turn around and launch all 15 in a salvo. I don't know of too many players who do that, but it's there. Tashkent, you know, you've got 3 triple launchers, and they are all center line, so, I mean, you can use that. But overall, not doing a whole lot of damage there. Tashkent, 51,000. These ships don't rely on their torpedoes, so it's not that big of a deal. Fletcher, like I said, 100,000. And I'll put all these up as online as well. I'll post a picture of it here as well. Tier 8, Kagerou, Akizuki. Both have 6% hit rates. Akizuki is a strange case because she only has the 1 quad launcher, and that kind of skews this data a lot, especially since, you know, damage-wise, I think that it's ignoring the torpedo reload booster because I don't have any way to account for that at all. So that's part of the problem with this analysis. But Kagerou, 107,825 max, about 5 torpedo hits every match. About 1 torpedo hit, again, every 16 torpedoes launched. So 2 full salvos, and we are getting 1 hit. And that's basically, if you use your torpedo reload booster on Kagerou, you're going to hit with 1, on average, with that. And that's going to come out, again, to about 107,000 damage. Akizuki is way lower than that. It's at 54,000-ish, and, well, that, again, I can't account for torpedo reload booster there, and it's hitting with about 1/4 of its torpedoes. Again, that's going to be the Type 93 Mod 2 torpedo that it has access to. Yeah, that's a hard comparison. Benson? Okay, so here's another U.S. destroyer that we frequently see, you know, our Japanese destroyers being compared to. Benson will hit with 4.5, basically, torpedoes in a 20-minute match for just 80,000 damage. That's a far cry from where Kagerou is at. In fact, once again, the most lethal comparison to our Kagerou is going to be the Z-23. The Z-23, with its 7% hit rate and fast torpedo reload, it's hitting with about the same hit rate, but it's hitting with far more torpedoes in a match because of the significantly quicker reload time. About 7.5 torpedoes in a match again, for 107,520 damage, which is pretty comparable to Kagerou, and I think if there was a case to buff any Japanese torpedoes, I think the Type 93 Mod 1 is, Mod 2 is probably the one to buff, but I don't know how you would buff that. Maybe bringing the detection range down 1/10 or 2 might help a little bit, land a little bit more torpedoes in a match, but you're going to have to significantly increase, in my opinion, or we could take Z-23 and tone it down, or we could do what I honestly think most Japanese destroyers need, and that's a little bit of gun love here. Tier 7, and this is the last tier that I went to, Akatsuki, only a 5% torpedo hit rate. Man, that's hard to believe in stomach. I don't know what to tell you with that, but if we did do it out, Akatsuki, with her fast reload on her torpedoes, she's hitting, again, about 1 torpedo every 18 torpedoes launched, or about roughly half of every salvo is landing. Half of a torpedo every salvo is landing. About 7 hits in a match for 122,445 maximum possible damage. The next closest destroyer, actually, the best destroyer at the tier for torpedo damage is Minsk, and quite honestly, I don't think this is a fair comparison. Minsk has a 4-kilometer torpedo, so its torpedo hit rate is artificially inflated because of how close it has to get in order to actually use its torpedoes, and the torpedoes hit like a truck. They do 18,000 damage basically every time they hit. In doing so, they tend to hit with more torpedoes on a match, plus they reload pretty quick, hitting with about, we'll call it an 8 torpedoes for 140,536 damage. That's a special case. Mahan, that would be a pretty good comparison, but overall, Shiratsuyu, again, this is another ship that's going to be hard to compare because Shiratsuyu has torpedo reload booster as an option, but even Shiratsuyu is doing better than the other destroyers at tier 7 that have usable torpedoes. Shiratsuyu hitting with almost 6 torpedoes in a match, 5.7, 98,000 damage. Mahan is the next closest at 96,000, and Liebrecht Moss is 92,000. So the Germans kind of given way a little bit there at tier 7 to other destroyers. So overall, you can see damage per match is actually pretty comparable across the board, if not a healthy advantage over other ships. And that's part of the reason why I argue so hard against buffing these torpedoes too much. If we decrease the detection range of these torpedoes too much, boy, it is going to get rough for enemy ships, especially battleships. Not that I care that much about that, but they do so much damage. Like I said, Shimakaze, if we rock F8 torpedoes on Shimakaze, almost 150,000, you got 147,000 damage just in torpedoes alone. Like, that is an insane amount of damage per match to be accomplishing. Now, there's high risk there. And the other part of this comparison is we're not really diving too much into playstyle. Obviously, U.S. destroyers and Japanese destroyers are probably the closest to, and I know I'm going to draw a lot of criticism for that. And let me explain. The U.S. destroyers at the beginning of the match, what do? They all go towards the cap, they all start capping, and then, well, once they take a significant amount of damage, which usually happens after the first engagement in a cap, they end up, they end up turning themselves into torpedo boats, using their smoke offensively. But basically, if they don't run into another destroyer at knife fight range ever again in the game, their guns are pretty much only useful in much the same way that Japanese destroyer guns are useful, except for one additional problem. They completely lack any ability at all to shoot at longer ranges than about 7K at something small like a DD. And that's hard for a lot of people to get used to. So that's an added problem. But once they get done with that, they turn into a torpedo boat. And, well, that's exactly what the US line, or what the Japanese line is. And so they rely heavily on their torpedoes. And I think those are the two that are closest to compare to. They do have good guns that are situationally good. Now, the next best line to compare to, I suppose, would be the Germans. And there are a couple of tiers where the Germans are doing well enough that, well, maybe we should consider downward tweaks to their torpedo armament. They are the, high spam factor. They are the really short reload time. In fact, their reload time for all of their destroyers from tier 7 on up is just 90 seconds. That's crazy, and that's the longest that it can get. That's assuming that they don't spec into torpedo reload. But anyway, I'll throw up a picture here towards the end that you can pause and kind of look at some of the data that I came up with. Let's look at this battle video. So a lot has happened in this battle video. I've been kind of rambling on here. We've managed to gun down a Minsk. We obviously dev struck and detonated the Shinonome at the very beginning of the match. And it is now me versus the world. Our team did the right thing. We managed to get all the caps right away at the beginning, and now I have the perfect opportunity to basically engage the remaining battleships. Tried to gun down a New Orleans earlier that was really low on hit points. We almost got it. Had 136 hit points left, but right now we got 2 Colorados moving pretty slowly. Need to pay attention to what's going on the minimap, and well, time's a clicking, right? it's one of those things, like they're capping B. It'd be nice to keep them from capping that if I could, but he left the cap. All right, so we got torpedoes that are inbound on this Colorado there. Looks like we might get 1 or 2. The other Colorado, ooh, would you look at that? That's kind of a pretty torpedo spread. Those are some good torpedoes. I think we're going to get 2 on Mr. Pappy there, and looks like we're going to get 3 on the other one. Yep, there's Confederate, and we killed off Pappy. And we've got ourselves a flood on the other one. And we managed to stop him from capping C. Wow. Yes, rip indeed. So, 904 points. We still have 3 caps. At this point, I don't have to do anything aside from run. There's really no point in running at this point. We're going to launch torpedoes at this Colorado. We're going to launch a set, anticipating his turnout. And, well, yeah, he's going to try to. I thought he might beach himself. Oop, Bayern there we need to pay attention to. We don't want to get too close, but I think he's just barely going to escape that. So we got our Bayern here. We're going to set ourselves up to prepare for that. But with only 1 minute and 30 seconds left in the match, this match is basically over. And you can see we've actually gotten 8 torpedo hits, which is fairly healthy margin more than, well, I guess it's only one torpedo hit more than the average is for the average player, or at least it would be if the average player could actually manage that. Now, one thing I do want to point out, and by the way, that is a very pretty torpedo spread. One thing I do want to point out about that analysis is that it makes the assumption that oh yeah, he's going down. It makes the assumption that everybody's launching their torpedoes on cooldown, and we know that that's not the case. Okay, so there's the end of the match. Oh, it must have hit points. And you can see there, Solo Warrior, woohoo! 123,640 damage, 4 kills, 10 torpedo hits, which is 3 more than the theoretical max average, 7,092 XP. First Solo Warrior ever, I couldn't believe that. 2,306 base XP. There's the detailed report. Not a whole lot of damage in fire or flood, but a lot of damage in torpedoes, and there's the credit screen. Anyway, the caveat to this is that the torpedo hit rate number, it would be best if we had the actual number of torpedoes, average number of torpedoes fired in a match. We don't have that number, so this is an assumption based on launching torpedoes on cooldown, which just isn't realistic at all. And so that's kind of one of the caveats to this. That's why I posted the average number of torpedoes hit per salvo. I think that that's a more accurate representation. If WarGaming were to ever come out with the number of average numbers of torpedoes launched in a match, that would be a huge number to have, and it would allow us to more accurately portray the balance of these ships in terms of torpedoes. It might get skewed even further towards IJN DD favors. Now, what are the Pan-Asian DDs going to do to this? I honestly don't know. We're going to be a ways out before we can actually get to that. Anyway, I'm your Peacekeeper. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to join me Saturday, 12/2, that would be December 2nd, 2017, at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, I will be doing another live stream test where I will announce the live streaming schedule. Anyway, like I said, like, comment, subscribe, and thank you guys for watching.